Hey everybody, this is Dan Keldsen, Chief Innovation Officer of InfoCap.ai. And in this episode of Next Future Today, I'm speaking with Donda Young. She's President and Principal Consultant at Helios Consulting. She's up in Maine, and I say up because I'm just south of Boston, so a mere stone's throw from me. And today we're talking about information management, information governance, records management. I think it's interesting. I've done a lot of it. It's arguably part of what we do at InfoCap. And when you're doing that kind of work and it's in a situation where you're working with a regulated industry or some kind of government agency or the military or things where there are some very harsh rules and regulations that you need to abide by and with very serious consequences, or a publicly held company, pharmaceutical companies, all these, there's some distinct challenges that you have there. And among them that we talk about is, what's the impact of AI? Does it expose how bad your practices are? Potentially. AI stories of hallucination happen all the time, and hallucination comes because you don't bother to put guardrails on it to keep it on track and stop from inventing plausible things. And the only way you're going to do that is if you have good control over the data that you feed it, because the value is in the proprietary data that you feed to any sort of AI environment. So if you're concerned that, or you've already experienced that your AI has gone a little wonky and maybe caused a public disaster of some kind of PR problem at the least, maybe some sort of regulatory impact, or much more mundane. You just, we have a need to get our stuff in line so that we can be acquired, or to set us up for being able to acquire other companies and know what we're getting into, what's underneath the hood that maybe we should know in advance. So if you're interested in anything that smells like that, then I think this episode might be for you. But why don't we find out? Let's go. Hey, Donda. So I've seen you on screen. I've read your work. I've heard all about you, but we have not had a chance to talk face to face. So thank you for coming on to Next Future Today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I stumbled onto you. You do, it seems like a regular thing with Jesse Wilkins and Steve Weissman on information governance.
Yes.
And a couple of months ago, I happened to stumble onto that, and I didn't realize that there was audience participation, which I was not quite ready for at the time. So it was interesting. I've known Jesse and Steve for a long time. We never overlapped at AIM, actually. So I worked at AIM once upon a time back in 2007, 2008, but we never crossed paths directly as, employees all at the same time. So part of what I'm trying to do, like I said, I want to help people jump ahead, essentially. So let's give them some cheat codes on how to get to like expert level and not necessarily have to go through the painful process it could otherwise take to get to expertise.
Understood.
Or competence. Give people a sense of how you got to where you're at now. What's your background, and how and why did you get involved in the glamorous world of information governance and records management?
Oh, gosh. So a little history lesson on me. I actually threw my name into a job fair and I got selected, and I started with an insurance company, and my longtime mentor and friend, Susan Whitmire, saw that, and here I am. So that's the short story. It was because this particular insurance company had done a merger with one that was here in Maine, and I actually happened to be in Tennessee at the time. So, the background of me is, believe it or not, I started dealing with microfilm and microfiche. I was doing indexing. I started, in cold rooms, and that's how I started in my career, and just quickly shot into basically a records analyst position, and then transitioned to the Portland, Maine office and helped implement a records management system, and did that for 3 main offices, as well as, I think, close to 20 or 30 field offices. So there was, this big push at the time of the merger to really move the records management needle forward. And that's what we did. And I was there for about 16 years, and then transitioned, as some folks affectionately call it, the dark side. I went to the vendor side. I think in total, between Big Blue, I'll say, and another smaller organization, it was about 6 years. And then I decided that I was going to work for myself and do this consulting thing. I've been doing it for a long time. I was doing it internally for organizations. And then when I went to the vendor side, I was doing it externally with lots of different clients, many in the financial services sector, but also healthcare, state government, governments, that kind of thing. And now I'm getting into some of the not-for-profit space, and it's actually I'm really enjoying that engagement. And also working again in the healthcare space a little bit. So it's different perspectives, and I think that's one of the great things about our industry is if you're not a practitioner and I'll say sitting in somebody else's seat where you're just working with that organization, you have the opportunity to branch out, whether it's on your own or working for a vendor to get more flavors, I'll say. And it's been just a wonderful learning opportunity to be able to do that. I will say that if you are, stuck in somebody else's seat and you're not having that well-rounded opportunity, I would say make sure that you are putting yourself out there within your own business and learn all of the business within your organization, because everybody creates information. Everybody has to store that information. That's a lot of transferable skills. That's how I got to where I am, is because I had those conversations with executives and with the boots on the ground individuals that was creating this information. How do you create it? Why are you creating it? Where is it stored? And those conversations, they kind of came easy for a people person, and that's me. So I would say put yourself out there. I say this a lot to the younger professionals or those maybe not so young and they have kind of landed in this space. You've got to put yourself out there. I think if I had done that in my 20s when I started, I'd be probably a little further along. It's always that I'm a little intimidated, I'm a little nervous, and I would say that probably I'm gonna guess maybe more so us women tend to be that way a little bit. And I would say try and move that aside for a moment and really put yourself out there to engage with the business to learn. Because when you're working with finance, marketing, HR, a lot of those types of internal departments, those lessons learned can translate to any other organization.
So did you have a library sciences background, or
No,
it was just a natural curiosity of some
no,
kind that
it
your
was
mentor spotted?
no library science background. I have some business management background, but I never really thought this would end up being a career when I started. I really didn't. I was early 20s when I started in this field, and mid 50s now. And so it's like, did I really think I'd stick with this? No, back then I didn't. I just thought it was a job. And it's a job that you learn a lot as you're doing it. A great apprentice opportunity, in my mind, quite honestly. Natural learners can gravitate towards this particular profession because you're going to pick up on things quite quickly, and you're going to be able to take those lessons that you've learned and keep growing them. And that's one thing that I have loved about this particular profession is the fact that there's always something new to learn. It's not stagnant. And if you have any of the information governance, information management, data governance certifications, you have to maintain your continuing education credits to keep your certification. And so I love that about this profession is because you're constantly having to learn what's the new thing. Well, right now it's AI. A few years ago it was blockchain. What's the hype of the day? And then, this privacy thing, that's always ever changing. And then you've got cybersecurity space and you've got the traditional records management, which is your foundation for all of this stuff, quite honestly, in my mindset. And without good governance, you're not going to have good data. Hopefully, organizations are really starting to pay attention to that.
It's awesome when what you're talking about lines up with some of the things that I was planning on talking about. So thank you for that. Easy setup. So I never meant to stumble into this world either. And I had sort of parallel path. I started as the first IT guy, which was mostly desktop support. And then I rapidly realized I had no idea what the business actually did. And I should probably figure that out if I was going to do anything more than turn it off and turn it on again. And like you, I'd like to learn. Sometimes it feels like there's too much to learn, but you're not going to get bored.
No,
that's for
no.
sure.
And the great thing too, Dan, is the fact that everybody has a little bit of a different flavor, a different perspective on how to approach something that has, and those lessons learned have, oh, well, this really worked for us. And yeah, you could share that, but that doesn't necessarily mean it will work for another organization. You might be able to spin it a little bit for your culture and it works, but you don't know unless you try.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found with information governance and records management, and I'm not certified in records management or most of these things, although I helped write the ECM master course when I was there and touched up some of the other courses. So frankly, I left this world for a bit because I was kind of tired of trying to help people realize what the potential was for caring for their information/data. Well, I'm tired of trying to sell food to people that are already well fed, apparently. So there's some industries and situations that are, if they're heavily regulated, there's a built-in, we could go to jail or get fined or whatever if we don't actually pay attention to this stuff. That's a lot of what we do at InfoCap. So it could be government, it could be healthcare, things where there's a natural inclination. We don't have to talk them into it. We're trying to do it cost effectively and do it swiftly and let them get back to doing whatever it is that they do and not have to worry about this stuff. How do you get people to realize there's not just avoiding risk, which is the obvious one, and we all react to pain avoidance pretty clearly. It's how we're wired. But what about, like for me, I'm always talking about there's bottom line impacts that we can have and there's top line things that we could do if it's, if there's some sort of profit motive or there's something where that makes sense. Is there an equivalent that you see to like a dual flavored sort of approach to, like, you're not regulated, but it's still a real good idea to do information governance for risk reduction in this way, but also if it's a business, because you could grow better, faster, cheaper, do more mergers and acquisitions. What do you see as kind of that approach?
My motto is start small, grow big. And it really stems from, I've seen so many organizations try to, as I said in the AIM podcast, eat the donut all in one bite. That's just not going to work, right? So people use the elephant analogy. I use the donut analogy. I like to take the small bites because they're more digestible. The biggest thing that organizations struggle with is change management. Regardless of what it is, whether it's a process change or a system change, it's a culture change for them because they're used to doing something the way that they've always done it. And they don't like change. People fear it, right? It's something new. Rather than embracing, hey, I get to learn something new, it's usually they're pushing back. And so I like to look at the lens, like you kind of indicated, the holistic view of what this information and data thing is. Where can we get the quick wins? And if it's a small pilot with a small team within the organization that really wants to improve, I can't find my stuff, we're so unorganized, can you help me? The answer is yes. Let's start there. Let them build up into champions. Their word of mouth is going to help the next group and the next group and the next group. Some organizations, especially the highly regulated ones, they tend to go at these huge projects for managing information. And they do a lot of things that touch a lot of groups at the same time. And like you said, people need to get back to work. Organizations, if you're going to pull people in to help you, you have to help yourself. You have to have the bodies and the resources to be able to work with, if you're pulling in outside vendors, to work with them, because this is your information. We're here to support and guide and even help do in some cases. But ultimately, when Donda Young or Dan Keldsen goes away, you guys are on the hook. You guys have to find this stuff, right? You have to be able to use it and leverage it. I would say, start on the smaller side if you can. But if you really want a fast trajectory, people like us will help do that too. But you really have to be able to have that change management internally and the constant messaging that this is coming, this is why, this is what it's going to do for you. What's in it for me is the value prop that we have to sell.
Somewhat rhetorical, well, definitely rhetorical question, but I'll ask anyhow. Have you ever seen anybody over communicate around this stuff?
No, I kind of would like to experience that, to see. That would be interesting. I don't think it's communicated enough. It never is. And it's not soon enough either. As soon as you know that you're going to be engaging with external parties or even internal parties to do a change when it comes to information, start your communication ASAP. I think that a lot of organizations tend to forget that they have different levels of audiences that they need to speak to, and their messaging is not catered to that audience. In public speaking or when you're talking to folks in organization, always on my reviews is know your audience. Speak to those that are in the room. Now, if you have a blended audience, then okay, that's a little bit different story. But when you're sending out emails, you have an executive email talking about this change. You have mid-level management talking to them at their level. And then you have the folks that are really in the trenches doing the work. That's where the value prop needs to be sold in my mind, because they're the ones that are touching this stuff every single day. And if we can make their lives easier, take out multiple steps in their day to make it faster, then they're going to be more productive. They're going to find the stuff more easily, and they'll be able to focus on more important things and other things to also help themselves have time to grow internally as well for themselves.
Did you follow the Enterprise 2.0 movement at all? 2006-ish to 2010?
Probably, but I've slept a few moons since then, so.
Okay. That was the rise of blogs and wikis for enterprises, among other things, and social network things for the enterprise. That's one of the few areas where I saw a lot of clients or just companies that I was aware of, because I did a bunch of market research on it, that really did thoughtful communication on a regular basis. I try to stick in multiple worlds so I can pull from different industries or B2B. How does that impact B2C? How does consumerism hit on the enterprise side? And it is astonishing how bad most corporate communications is, even if they have incredible marketing. So they can do a great job communicating to their buyers, consumers, clients, constituents, whatever they are. But when it comes to internally, a whisper, it's nothing. Here's yet another change. So getting to your point about, speaking the language for the audience, you had a recent blog post called Metrics That Matter, or Proving Information Governance Drives Business Value, which is awesome. I think it could have been your opening line was, in today's digital first world, information governance is no longer a back office function. It's a strategic imperative, which is, I agree. One of the challenges is it's easy to say something's a strategic imperative. It's also easy to do nothing at all about it. So for people who have not read your blog post, what are the kinds of things that you recommend, and how do you target? The reason why this is valuable to do this is because in your position as whatever kind of executive.
I just gave a talk at Arma's InfoNext last week. And yeah, it was about AI. Ish, but it was more about data quality and how information governance, records management, and data quality, that's your foundation. If you don't have a good foundation for your skyscraper, what's going to happen? It's going to fall. Right? And that's the analogy that I used. If you don't have a good governance and data quality foundation for your organization, you're going to get garbage out if you start doing this AI thing. But you're also getting garbage out already because you're not applying the foundational elements of records management, information data governance to your information to have quality information so that even your existing outputs are the best outputs they possibly can be. That's my message to C-suite organizers, that whether you're going into AI, and as Jason Stearns, who sat in on my session, had asked me, some of these organizations, Donda, aren't doing that. They're not doing AI. The government is not necessarily in the AI space. Local, maybe some Fed groups, but what do they do? What's the message for them? And the same message is there. You have to get your foundation in order. You have to build that as a strong foundation so that you can elevate yourself to whether you go to AI or not, whether you go to blockchain, whether you go to the next big thing, who knows? But you still have to have that foundation in order. You have to have your proper governance to make sure that the quality of information that you're creating, that you're storing, delivering and that you're providing whoever your customer is the best quality that it can be and the most efficient for your employees to make sure that they're getting their jobs done the most efficiently. If you're not doing that, then you're doing it wrong, in my opinion.
How do you help them gauge that? I've been a fan of maturity models for a long time, and that can help. Some people don't like maturity models because they might end up on the immature side of, of a model.
Those models are good starting points to help understand where are you now and where do you want to be. There are lots out there, as you said. And pick your flavor of the moment or blend it. If you're in vendor consulting space, use multiples. I don't think one is necessarily the best over another, and it also depends on the culture of the organization. One of my favorite people and mentors in this space, Steve Weissman, says all the time, what's the business problem you're trying to solve? Let's tackle that. And that might be that start small, grow big thing, because let's tackle that little nugget that you're really struggling with, and let's see how that nugget develops after we get through this thing, this project, and what else can we tackle? Maybe that nugget helps something else. Who knows? So yes, I think there's multiple ways that you can address whatever the business issue is. From my perspective, you really need to understand what's the cultural appetite for change and what is it that you really need to tackle versus want to tackle. I think sometimes the wants tend to be I really want to get to this AI thing or this blockchain thing or this whatever thing. Great. How's this other stuff? Because this other stuff is going to feed this stuff. How's that looking? And let's tackle that first, So maturity models, I think repurposing the tools of the trade, I'll say, that are out there. Don't try and reinvent the wheel if you don't have to, because I think that's just silly. You want to be able to leverage what us information management professionals, data management professionals have created to make our vendor, consultant, even your internal practitioner lives easier. Leverage what's already out there and put it to use. You may not need one of us, consultants. You may be able to do it yourself, but have those conversations with your IG and your records management teams, because likely they're going to have those resources, or your data management team. They're going to have the resources. And I say resources in the sense that they're likely part of associations that cater to that profession. They're going to have templates. They're going to have tools. They're going to have maturity models that you all can start doing some of those things yourself. But if you don't have the people resources to do some of those things, then, there's people like us out here that can help.
There's something in the water recently. We've gotten a ton of inquiries about companies that are trying to prep to do mergers and acquisitions much more efficiently and effectively. It's kind of random process in a lot of ways right now. And they want to formalize that, and they want to make sure that when they're doing their due diligence, that they're not just looking at the financials, which can bury a whole bunch of stuff that's underneath that might come and bite you, right? But really, do more of a due diligence on the technology and the systems that support these businesses that they're acquiring, so that they can either fold them in. It could go any number of ways, but we want to make sure that our mergers actually work. They go swiftly. We avoid things that could blow up on us to the extent we can. What are you seeing as far as when people come to you, like they're trying to cut certain costs or cut certain risks? Do they have it identified, or is it like, we need help, please help us do something?
The couple of clients that I've worked with over the last couple of years, it's really been about, we know that we can do better in managing the information. And we have implemented, and especially for the highly regulated groups, it's a little bit easier. They have to adhere to X, Y, or Z reg. And that's the impetus of moving their IG information governance needle forward. But for those that aren't, I would say it's definitely been AI. And they want to be more efficient when it comes to providing information back to their clients. So speed to market, they want to be able to serve their constituents a more efficient way, because that's going to make them happy, but it's also going to be more efficient internally, right? They want internal efficiency without having a hammer of governance on top, because sometimes it's perceived as, oh gosh, we got to do this governance thing and it's just going to take forever. And then we have new things and new ways and stuff that we have to tag appropriately. And yes, Well, guess what? Yes. Even if you are not a highly regulated organization, you still have HR and you still have finances. And if you have any type of broker, dealer, etc., you have regs, right? Even in not-for-profit organizations, there are audits that occur, and you still have to adhere to those external audit requirements. And being able to fulfill those requirements, you have to be able to find the information, right? That's what they're asking for. How did you do this? What did you do? When did you do it? And let's look at some of that. Well, to be able to do that, you still have to organize your stuff. And part of organizing your stuff is governance. I just see that it's the same business problem over and over again for the last 20 something years. And Dan, that's probably why you kind of jumped out of the space for a while, because it is. And some professionals I've heard in this space say, man, I've been saying this for over and over and over again. I think, honestly, AI lately has kind of pushed an envelope with organizations for that governance layer to be more what it should have been 15, 20 years ago. It's what we records management and information management professionals have been saying for decades, that if you organize this stuff in a way that you can find it later, use it later, store it, and then get rid of it when you no longer need it because you don't want to have that stuff laying around when the crap hits the fan, right? You don't want it discoverable. If you got rid of it based off of your retention policies, then you're good. But if it's sticking around, guess what? You have to produce it. And so that's a risk layer that, it's been around forever. But maybe because of this AI thing, they want better outputs. They want good quality inputs, but they want even better outputs. I think they're starting to pay a little more attention. Now, whether this, blockchain when it first came out was the big hype, everybody's going to move to blockchain, it's going to work great, etc. Some organizations adopted it, some didn't. Now, this AI thing, yes, it's been around for a while, but there's so many different language models that can be used for very, very different, even tiny minutia little things. Even as just a silly chatbot, a help chatbot. Those things can help internally, whether it's just an internal chatbot or, we've seen it in the insurance space or even in the vendor space where you can ask the chatbot a question. Those efficiencies, because it allows a human to do something more meaningful and creative and worthwhile than answering these repetitive things over and over again. It's the same message. We've been saying it for decades, and I'm hoping and praying that organizations just really start listening to their records management and information data governance professionals, because we've been trying to say the same data quality message. Maybe we haven't used those particular terms, but it does mean the same thing.
Since generative AI is normally what we're talking about for AI these days, and obviously that's been growing and morphing quickly, would be a huge understatement. Along the way, do you think it has helped to just explode the signs of bad data that were always there? And are there any famous, infamous examples that you can think of where they clearly went too hard on using AI for what it's promised to do, which is more or less magic? They got slapped with a fine or thrown in jail or had some huge PR thing that blew up in their faces because they didn't bother to do the data quality and use technical things like RAG and DAG and all these things to put some guardrails in. Anything that really comes to mind is either they did an awesome job, we can use them, or they failed miserably and you should avoid being like these people.
An example or two that I used in my presentation at InfoNext, there's a very large, I'll call it book vendor, where they were cited for their AI when it came to resumes. The AI was picking up on more male resumes in hiring than it was female because there was a bias in it. So that's one example. And in the real estate space, kind of the similar bias being put in there where disproportionate, individuals or certain neighborhoods, it was unfair practices because of those biases. So when we're talking quality data, we're talking about bias as well. So when you're teaching these models, you have to take yourself out of it. I can't just be the white lady developing these things. I have to think from that holistic lens of who is this going to touch? It's going to touch a lot of demographic, and you have to make sure that you're doing your best to keep a lot of those biases out of your data when you're trying to teach these models. Those are two, I'll say two small examples, but you can imagine that regardless of the employer, if they're using an AI and it's picking up on, say, it's one particular group and you're hiring all men, or even the opposite, they're hiring all women, and it's not fair employment practices. So you have to be careful.
I don't know if it's AI related, but I believe all the car crash studies, vehicle crash studies, assume that it's basically an average white guy is the driver. What about tall people? What about short people? What about pregnant women? Yada, yada, yada. People like us who have stumbled into and not escaped from the gravity of this sort of world. If you are just coming at this fresh, it sounds like there's a ton of things that you need to consider. And how in the world are you going to do that? If you have a problem, but there's like, well, here's 100 ways that you could solve that problem or start thinking about that problem. And like, well, I need the answer to help me make some progress.
And it's funny you say that, because I recently had a conversation. I honestly can't remember with whom it was with, but that's what the Gen Z group wants. Just give me the answer. I don't want to learn I want to read the book, I want to take the test, and I want to get it done. And I want to move on. But sometimes there isn't just one answer. And I do think that's because of the culture that organizations breed. If they're an inclusive and communicative, and they're constantly communicating with each other about changes and happenings, etc., I think that adoption of doing the right thing goes really well, and people gravitate towards that because it is their culture, it is their flavor, that they want to do what's best for not only their clients, but also for them internally. And I had the pleasure of working with an insurance company here in the Northeast for a while, and I can honestly say it was amazing to see that type of engagement and culture at that organization. But for those folks that are coming into this profession, my advice would be, you're not going to get all the answers all at once. It's not going to be one-stop shop. It's not going to be, I'm going to read this one project. This is the way we do it. This is how it's done. I can take that and go anywhere with it, and it's rinse and repeat. No, it's not. There are some elements of this profession that can be rinsed, repeated, and again. But if you're not taking culture of an organization, or even if it's a small group, your own team, if you're not taking the pulse of the culture of your own team or your organization into whatever it is in this InfoGov, data gov space, it's not going to work. There isn't an easy button, okay? It isn't just to press the easy button and immediately the answer comes up. There are people in the association space in this particular profession that are willing to help, that are willing to share their knowledge. I have many of them. My network is quite big, and it constantly grows every year because I always meet somebody, whether it's at one of the association conferences or one of their chapter conferences, that we've had a conversation and I'm like, wow, this person is fantastic. They've done something that I haven't done yet, and I now know that I can pick up the phone or send an email or message them in LinkedIn and say, hey, can you help me? Because sounds like you went through this. Any tips? A body of knowledge is only as good as those that helped create it, and not everybody can contribute to that because everybody's perspective and how they have developed in this information governance space has been different from everybody else. There are some similarities, but it's different. So a body of knowledge, if that's what you're looking for, fantastic. You can take it, get the credentials, and move on to the next one. But the knowledge comes from doing the work.
One of the major thrusts of Next Future Today is to equip people that they could actually do something today that will purposely influence their future. So if they care about information governance, records management, anything like that, and they feel like they are not getting the budget or the resources or the buy-in or whatever it is that would help them in their role take their organization to the next level, what do you think they should do?
The first thing that comes to mind is Build your business case. Tell the story of what you think you can provide to the organization, how providing it will add value, and tie that value to the mission and the goals of the organization. Sometimes that's hard to do, but to do it, talk with some of your C-suite individuals and have that conversation. It is like, hey, can we go have a 15, 20-minute coffee? Here's my idea. This is how I think I can bring value, but I need maybe a little bit of help in developing this out because I see what we're trying to do in some business areas or et cetera, but you've got to tell the story and you have to sell the story, not just tell it, but you have to sell it. And for some folks, that's hard to be a salesperson. I still struggle with being a salesperson because I'm a very candid, frank communicator. Like, I'm going to tell you straight up. And sometimes that has worked out really well. And a lot of times organizations like that frankness. Sometimes they don't. But you have to sell your story to your C-suite, but you have to tie it to the mission and goals. What are the goals for the year? Okay, great. This is what we want to do. You want to increase your sales by a certain percentage. Okay, so how does information governance, records management, data governance do that? Make your information more efficient, right? You have to have the people and you have to have the process to run the technology. Technology is just the layer that's just going to make things more efficient. But if you don't have the people that can run the process and run that process within the technology, then, it's not going to work. You've got to have all three and you have to be able to sell that value.
For people who want to find out more about you, get in touch, talk to you about your services, what are your preferred ways for people to get a hold of you?
So Helias Consulting, HELIAS consulting.com is my website. And you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm generally there quite frequently. So yes, reach out in both ways, shapes, and forms. And if you're part of the AIM, ARMA, or DAMA associations, I'm a member of those as well. So there's ways to reach me, certainly. But I would say LinkedIn and my website is probably the best way to do that.
All right. Well, Donna, thank you so much for making the time to speak with me today and get on Next Future Today. I hope we've inspired some people to either keep sticking with it or get started because they can make a huge difference. And I think AI has exposed a whole bunch of opportunity that had been sitting there that wasn't quite unleashed. And maybe it's been unleashed a little too much too soon. But, there are ways to... You can actually close Pandora's box sometimes.
You can. Well, thank you, Dan, for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I hope we have the opportunity again. I love doing these things. So anytime that I'm able to give back to our profession, I will jump at the chance.
All right. Thank you so much, Donna. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Dan. See you later.